Okay, I think we're live. Okay,
Yes.
we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar about Google Passages and passage indexing with Martin Splitt from Google, with Cindy Krum from Mobile Moxie, and with Tomek Rudzki from Onely. I just have to mute my YouTube window because I hear myself. So I wanted to open, like, this is a conversation. This is going to be a laid-back conversation with Martin to address a lot of gossip, a lot of misunderstandings in the community around passage indexing. So basically, what I want to go with is I want to start with a very, very simple question. If we're looking at passage indexing, from what I understand, this is going to help users, webmasters with long form content to rank a piece of their content rather than having like 10 different smaller articles about the topic.
Yes, pretty much.
Okay.
That's the core. Like you're basically pointing out the core. While I'm not super excited about us framing it originally as passage indexing, it is actually a ranking change.
So yeah, I wanted to touch on that because we were just talking about with Tomek recently that the name passage indexing could be a little bit better. I don't want to judge Google here, but this is actually not changing how you index content. It's just changing how you rank content that's already indexed in your database.
Yeah, pretty much.
Passage ranking, right?
Yeah, I would call it passage ranking. That makes sense.
Okay. So passage ranking. So now, do we need to do anything specific to like use that new change?
Yeah, no, that's a change that is pretty much purely internal, and there is nothing that you need to do. You don't need to make any changes to your websites. You don't need to make any changes to any of your pages, to any of your articles, or to your markup. There's no special thing that you need to do. It's just us getting better at more granularly understanding the content of a page and being able to score different parts of the page independently.
So if I want to play with that, and let's say I have that my HTML5 markup, or I'm going to use those H2s, H3s, can I somehow improve my rankings in that passage ranking, or is it something that happens like you understand the content regardless of the markup?
It's pretty much that. I mean, with any kind of content, you want to have some semantic and some structure in your content so that it's easier for automated systems to understand the structure and the kind of like the bits and pieces of your content. But even if you would not do that, we would still be able to say like, oh, this part of the page is relevant to this query, where this other piece of your page is not as relevant to this query.
So just before we get into geekier questions, so if tomorrow we're seeing let's say an SEO agency or an SEO software out there saying that they optimize for passage indexing, would that be a thing? I didn't see any yet, but I'm sure they're gonna pop up quickly.
How do I put this nicely? Each to their own, I guess. Sure. There will probably be some people who try to capitalize on this, but I wouldn't fall for it.
So there is not going to be any like special, yeah.
No, really.
I can imagine. So I think we went through the core idea of what passage indexing is. And I wanted to ask you before we begin one last warm-up question. What are the myths? What's your favorite misunderstanding of what passage indexing is? Do you have anything like that? I'm guessing you're the person that's going to be bombarded with all of these on a daily basis.
Conveniently, I wasn't. I love this. I think like the core myth is that it's a thing, because really, it is just a smaller change where we try to help those who are not necessarily familiar with SEO or how to structure their content or a content strategy, because lots of people end up creating these long-winded pages that are having a really hard time ranking for anything, really, because everything is so diluted in this long-form content. We are helping those, but if you are in this webinar, I would assume that you have some grasp of the topic and that you have some strategic thinking about how to structure your content in the first place, that this is pretty much not for you. It's not really something that you need to pay attention to or worry about.
Okay. Actually, one last question, because I was looking at the documentation around that at Google, and I'm not sure if I understood that, because some of that I wasn't sure where the passage indexing part ends. But looking at, for example, categories in e-commerce stores, is it also something that you will where passage indexing will be useful? So if I have a very long category page with like budget headphones and expensive headphones and something like that, is it gonna be a place where Google might move the user to, let's say, a section within the category or something like that?
I mean, unlikely, because normally there isn't that much content around the specific bits in the category that we would consider a passage. And also it's a mostly natural language understanding. So unless it's textual content, it doesn't really benefit from this. Also, it's more likely that the individual product pages would then probably be relevant to the query that was entered, and then those would outrank the category page nonetheless.
Amazing. So that's all from me. I know that both Cindy and Tomek have some questions. So Cindy, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I just thought we would start with maybe something simple. Martin, can you clarify the difference between passages and featured snippets?
Oh my. So featured snippets, it's internally that is a completely separate system. In featured snippets, we just find a self-contained piece of information on a page, and a single page can contain multiple of those. That's all fine. And then we might pull this out into a featured snippet and put that as like the kind of instant answer to the question that was asked. That's a very simple thing. But here, this is not really about having an answer to a question or having like a self-contained bit of information, but more like, let's say, what would generate a featured snippet? There's this brilliant example that Izzy Smith usually gives when she talks about the topic. It's like, what's the legal age to rent a car in Germany? If we find an answer that looks like the actual answer to this, we might feature this in the snippet, and the page can then be seen in a featured snippet. Whereas here, we wouldn't do passages for this kind of stuff, probably because we might find enough pages that actually have good content on that already and have a definite answer to this. But what if I'm asking for calories in a cupcake, and then there is a page that answers that question concisely? This might be pulled in a featured snippet, but then there might be this page that has a really long history of cupcakes around the world. And somewhere in there says like, and the average lies between A and B, but doesn't really answer it concisely, but more elaborate on this. And then we might say like, okay, so this page has a lot going on here, but there's this part that is a potential good blue links kind of result that you might be interested in, but it doesn't really get to the point. It doesn't give you a concise answer. That's what we found in the featured snippet instead. So they are not the same. They're different pieces, and also different systems picking them up, actually.
Okay, cool. That fits really well with the kind of an example I've been using with, like, if you're talking about a garden and you have all of the vegetables in your garden, but the query is about a specific kind of tomato that you talk about, you guys are able to surface that specific tomato content potentially. Yeah,
that's a really good example. And again, if there is a page that has the details of the specific query, then that might also get pulled into a featured snippet. Yeah.
And so something can be a passage and a featured snippet, but just because it's one doesn't mean it's the other.
Yes. And I'm not actually sure if something that would be extracted as a featured snippet would also be picked up as a passage. I'm not sure if the implementation allows us to do that, but it's different things, basically.
Cool. Tomek.
Okay, question from me. Ready? Okay.
Sure.
So in Google Post, there were two concepts introduced: subtopics and what we call it? passage ranking, right? So these two concepts were introduced, and I was thinking, what is the intersection between this concept? And I gave up. Okay, I was thinking they can really be interconnected, and my idea was, okay, subtopics allows Google to pick what it calls subtopics, and then passages allows it to rank. Would you agree, or?
I'm not sure how we introduce subtopics. I know that we have something in the filters in the search interface, but I'm not super sure. How did we describe subtopics here?
It's described like a big chunk of the SERP disambiguation. So if I search for cashmere, we can do cashmere sweaters, women's cashmere.
Right. That's right. Okay, now I know what you mean. Yes, that's part of the query understanding, and that allows us to give you alternative ways of basically zooming into the content. So it's more of an understanding thing, whereas passages is a ranking thing. So we are saying like, this is not just, this entity is not related to these other entities, and this might be a search intention, this might be a slightly different search intention. That's what subtopics would do. And then we have the passages, which is more like, there's this gigantic document, and this part of the document is what you might be interested in this query. The rest of the document is not that relevant to your specific query, so we might pull this out specifically into a search result.
So I'm a bit confused, though, about the way you have it divided in the way you talk about it, because in the announcement, they talk, I know you weren't part of the announcement, but in the announcement, they talk about passages as it relates to understanding, and they talk about BERT. So you're saying passages aren't understanding, but
the problem
like
here
they
is,
are little.
Okay, so the problem is there's like lots of smaller systems talking to each other, so everything is blurry. There is no clear separation between the things. But for me, how I look at it is when we talk about passages as a thing that you see in search results ranking, that requires that we understand the document. Of course, like we can't say like, oh, this passage is about this thing if we don't understand that. But then there's this other understanding, which is more like, how does this relate to things, and how does this get disambiguated from other and similar topics or similar entities? In the sense that, as you say, Kashmir could be a region of India. It could also be clothing related. It could also just be the fabric itself. It can be different kinds of clothing. All of these are familiar or similar concepts, but extracting these concepts and extracting how this relates to each other is a separate process internally for us than it is to understand what this page is about. That's completely, it's related, but it's completely separate processes. And yes, both of that actually uses BERT because we need to understand the human language. Without natural language understanding, we can't do either of these things. But in this case, passages are a ranking feature where we say like, oh, so this page covers these 5 different topics, and one of the topics is this specific tomato kind, for instance, that as you used the example for gardening, whereas the rest of the page talks about cucumbers and gardening in general and vegetables and nutrition. It's not the same as subtopics where we would say like, oh, so this specific tomato, so you might be interested in tomatoes or fruits or whatever is related to that specific tomato. If it's coming from a specific geographical region, then that might be a thing. Using the same systems or the same principles, natural language understanding, BERT, but basically resulting in different outcomes or different parts of the search result page in the end. Ooh, lots of questions are coming in.
I'll read one to you. Okay, go ahead.
One quick question. When you want to introduce this change, passage indexing?
I think, as far as I'm aware, in November, in the post or in the video, we said next month, which would mean December. But I'm not sure if it goes live before the feature freeze for this year. So it might happen that this actually becomes effective next year. But again, if you have a website that ranks well, it's not really a problem for you. We are only improving ranking for pages that are currently having trouble.
So one more question that I wanted to ask is about video. So does it also work with like YouTube videos or any video content? Obviously not only on YouTube. So will you direct people to a part of the video of like how to video or something like that as well?
That would go into a part of the search infrastructure that I'm not familiar with, which is how video and image search do these things. There are separate systems that do work with images and videos. I know that we do break out chapter marks. I don't know exactly how we do that. That would be a question for the video search team. As far as I am aware, as of today, passage ranking, passage indexing, whatever you want to call it, is effective only on text.
We'll change that name for you. We'll change it to which is gonna boycott that name as a community.
I have a follow-up question on that. If it's only good on text, do you think that it's used or going to be used or theoretically makes sense to be used in things like single-page apps, native apps, books from Google Books, things without URLs?
I am wondering about how we actually search in Google Books, but for single-page apps and others, I can say that I'm not sure how we are indexing apps, like native apps. But for single-page applications, the bigger problem is that if something doesn't have like single-page applications are not necessarily having URLs for all pieces of content, that's true. But if we can't access it in the first place, then you're kind of screwed. Like if we can't ever see the content because there's no way that we are seeing it, that's a tricky thing. If the content is already in the DOM, just not visible, and there's no URL to specifically make it visible, then yes, that would be a case where this could potentially help, except for if it's not visible in the DOM, then where would we actually go? So that, again, is a little tricky. Then it depends on the implementation. I would say if you are dealing with a single page application, still try to have URLs for each piece of content that you really, really care about. Again, passage indexing is a way for us to better or to give a better chance to long-winded, diluted content to potential rank for multiple queries.
Okay. Tomek, Cindy, do you have any more questions, or should we move on to the Q&A?
I'm happy to move on to Q&A. I could ask questions forever. Perfect. So
I think we all could, but just I think the most important one.
We can go on.
Oh, I have actually one from Twitter before we move into the Q&A. Something that was actually interesting point of view for me. Will it affect ads? We had a few people that reached out to us. Like I couldn't see a scenario myself that it would affect ads, but
as this process is happening on the Google search side of things, I don't think it's going to affect ads, but that would be a question for the ads team if they want to use some part of that infrastructure, but I don't think so.
So one scenario I came up with is if it's going to be passage ranking, then we're going to click on the result and we're going to be, I'm guessing, scrolled, the page will scroll down to the part of the text. So probably those ads on the top of the page, all of that might be affected in this way. But that's the only scenario I'm seeing, and it's really, it's not a...
That's fair point.
I was speculating on Twitter, maybe in the same thread or a different one, that it's not passages that would impact ads as much as potentially the subtopics, which I do think might be a bigger thing that we should be focusing on. I think passages are awesome, of course, but subtopics, when they break it out, there could be now 4 knowledge graph on a page or 4 knowledge graph with ads, and like, where do the blue links go? We don't know.
I already see Dave Davies in the chat saying that probably publishers will now move all of the ads into different sections. So we're going to see more and more of like video games trying to read content, avoiding ads throughout the whole page. So that might be an interesting change. So I think we can move on to the Q&A. And let me start from the top. And I'm not sure if this wasn't answered already, but I will start with the first question. So no way for us to determine if we got a passage or a featured snippet, if it's going to be reported in Google Search Console.
I don't think it's reported in Search Console.
Okay, that was quick. Can you see passages being introduced as SERP featured in some form? Similar to people also asked.
I don't think that we will create a new type of result. It's, as far as we care, it's just the blue links results that takes you to a specific part of the page that would not be shown in the first place without this being available.
And this one is tricky. I'm sure you're going to love this one, Martin. Hey, Martin, is it true that when we click the I feel lucky button, it will be redirected to a featured snippet potential page?
I'm not sure I understand the question to begin with, but
is I feel lucky, is it still a thing in Google?
I think it's still a thing. I think that still exists, and you can still do that. I just actually.
We all are lucky.
Yeah,
Are people optimizing for it though? Who asked that question?
I feel like I'm missing out. I never clicked it. Like with my OCD, I would never let that decision. But yeah, so
I'm also not 100% sure what actually. Let me try something. So what happens if I've clicked I'm feeling lucky? I'll just go to something. I think this is literally probably just pulling something that like from basically we're going through the entire system. We get a bunch of results back, and then it chooses one out of the pack. But I'm not exactly sure if we are having any criteria on that.
Okay, moving forward. So if my text is not very good, but I have an H2 excellent, which answers to a query perfectly, can I have a better ranking than texts that are complete but do not answer very well to a specific query?
That's a very specific ranking question. And actually, I'm quite intimidated by this entire webinar because I am technically answering ranking questions, which is something that for very good reasons I never do. And this is definitely in the area where I'm like, that's full on in ranking, and that's not something that I would answer.
Okay.
It was presented as indexing.
So I know Martin presented as indexing, which is exactly how I got tricked into this. And I'm basically my mission here is to say, like, it's not an indexing change, it's a ranking change.
But there's a simple answer to this question. It's not as complex as it looks. Should you have an excellent H2? Yes, you should.
Fair enough, but like that's if I were in your shoes, I could answer like that, but because I am basically being seen as the Google dude, I should really not answer this because there's the last part of the question, which is like, does it have a better ranking than a text that has a complete answer but does not answer well to a specific query? I can't answer that because I don't know.
I was just trying to help out.
Okay.
Good helping, but I just need to be very, very careful that people are not taking this like, oh, so yes, that means yes, like, right? It's like, no, it does not mean yes. It means, yes, it's great to have good H2s in your content. It doesn't mean that this necessarily means that you're ranking better.
Okay, moving forward, we don't want to get Martin in trouble, especially during our webinar. That would be very, very awkward later on. So how would it display in Search Console for the passage? I think we answered that. We don't know if it's going to be presented in Search Console. We have to wait and see. What if that text has image attached to it?
Good.
Amazing. Next question, should certainly impact how publishers place ads? Yeah, that's something we're talking about. I think this is Dave Davis's question. So to make them more relevant to the passage and the doc. So yeah, I would assume that publishers will structure their content differently, and I would assume more ads in the bottom of the page. No, go.
So just a quick question, and I'm guessing you can't say, but let's just ask it anyway. Do we have a guideline on how long or short passages can be to be considered passages?
I don't think there is a specific guideline because, again, this is based on what the algorithm picks up, and that's machine learning, so that can change at any point in time. And it can be really short. It can be as short as like a few words. It can be as long as a paragraph, I would guess. Or maybe longer. I don't know.
2 paragraphs.
Maybe even 5. Maybe more than 7, as Gary likes to say. It's more than 7.
Okay, moving forward, should certainly that already did it. As passage indexing influences ranking, can a page ranking for a passage within the body copy outrank a page with the query in the page title? Oh, that's interesting.
That's an interesting question. And also, if you think about it, if you were the search engine, and let's ignore passages for a moment. Does a page with some content more relevant to the query outrank a page with less relevant content, but a good page, like basically the query in the page title?
So if you're asking us, I would assume that it doesn't matter. Like the key thing here is user experience, I would assume. So
yeah, and relevance.
If you have a passage that's extremely well versus the whole page on the topic, that's so. Yeah. So I would assume that this is your answer.
Ta-da!
Will there be a way in the URL that will be able to see the jump like we can in a featured snippet? Will it be the same as the featured snippet?
So I would assume that you would be able to see the jump in the URL, but I'm not sure that is necessarily the case. I know that there is the new, what's it called? Text anchor specification, I think, where you basically can use any piece of text content in a page as a jump anchor, using like I think it's hash. Oh, what is it? Hash something hash, I think. Hash exclamation, something like that.
You're correct, yeah. It's hash something hash. Yeah. but I'll tell you that you can see when you click on some passage tests that I've seen, there was stuff passed to the anchor.
Right. Okay, in that case we apparently can't.
We are so technical with this hash something. I love it. We should make into a meme. I don't remember how it's called as well. So probably Tomek.
But you can see it in the URL.
Yeah.
Probably linked text fragment. I would assume that we use the text fragment thing, but I can't guarantee that we are.
Yes.
That's why we love you, Tomek. Okay, so may you test passaging? I love it. May you test passaging before rolling out, so publishers see how they're affected and have time to get prepared?
Yeah, I mean, so may you test passaging? I can assure you that we are not rolling anything out without testing upfront. And I'm pretty sure that when we roll out passages, we are probably rolling it out bit by bit and not in one huge go. It's the same with, let's say, like HTTP2. Crawling does not roll out for 100% of the pages immediately. We roll it out in smaller batches and then see what happens. Again, there's nothing you need to do. There's nothing you need to worry about. It just, again, allows pages that are not ranking well and don't have a good structured content to begin with, or have like focused pages to begin with, to also potentially rank for queries. It's not for you who knows what they are doing. If you know what you're doing, passage indexing or passage ranking or whatever you want to call this thing, passaging will be the least interesting thing that has ever happened to you.
But wait, Martin, so it is the change that affects like 6% of queries, right?
Sure. 7% of the queries worldwide.
If you can understand the page better and rank a specific passage, someone wins, someone loses. So in such a case,
that
people can detect there can be some crawl issue or whatever, and in fact, it can be because of passages.
It could be, yeah.
So,
but I mean, if you have good, relevant, well-structured content, I would be surprised if a random passage on a really long page is magically so good that it outranks you. And if it does...
So I think what Vahan meant, and I'm not sure, but I would assume that he was asking if there's going to be some kind of fetch and render feature or something like that that's going to let you see passages. From my logic, it's not possible, but yeah. So
yeah, no, that it's not something that you can necessarily really take that much action on unless you restructure your content or rewrite your content. And there's no tool to like check ranking, really. At least we are not providing any way of doing that. And it's not a change in indexing. It's not a change in rendering. It's not a change in crawling. So none of the technical aspects that you have control over, we expose towards you through the testing tools is affected. So there will not be a passage testing tool.
So I wanna pause on that for a second, because first of all, to everyone watching, send us more questions. Secondly, what I think is coming from this question is that maybe a lot of people don't really understand the whole idea that passage indexing means that your content lives within this huge database of Google. So there's no way of testing how it's gonna be performing later on, because you need to run a test of each passage against a whole database, which is a hugely complex task, I'm imagining, and it's based on machine learning, probably artificial intelligence of sorts. So you can only test it, just like with rankings of your page, by publishing your content and seeing how it's going to perform in Google. Would that be correct?
I would say so, yeah. So, and again, don't mistake it for an actual change on how we do things in terms of getting you into this big database, which is our index. It is, again, just a way. So to explain this as simple as I can, I might not be as simple as possible because I might not be so good at explaining things like this, but I'll try. Before passage indexing, situation 2 months ago, basically, you had a page with lots of text on it. Our index would basically look into what is this page about. And the first thing it would do is it would say like, okay, so this is the menu, I don't care. This is some random cookie warning, I don't care. This is the footer, I don't care. So this is the main piece of content. This is the centerpiece. This is what apparently matters. This looks like the main content. Has always done it like that. Has always tried to figure out what's this page about. And now what it used to do is it tried to figure out what is this page about by basically looking for one subject. What is most likely the main thing that this is covering? And then maybe you had a few pages that were relatively laser focused on the different kinds of vegetables, one page for each vegetable. So it was easy for us to say like, oh yeah, this is about tomatoes. This is about cucumber. This one over there is about avocado. Cool. But what if you actually somehow, for some reason, because you didn't really know what you were doing, you have just one huge website that talks about all the different vegetables. What is this website about? Well, vegetables. Great. But is this a good
page?
Sorry, page. If you have one huge page with all the vegetables on them, what is this page about? Well, vegetables. Okay, great. But if I then look for very specific information about the Latin name or why a certain tomato is called something specifically in Latin and has a fun fact attached to it, then I'm searching for that specific thing, then this page is tricky because in ranking, we look at all the pages we have on this specific topic of this specific Latin name for this specific tomato. And there are a few pages that are specifically about this tomato, this kind, not even tomatoes, just like this specific kind of tomato. And then there's this other page that is about all sorts of vegetables. So now we're having the problem of how do we rank these two different pages? We have one page that is very specific on this thing, and the other page is very specifically not on this thing, but on all sorts of vegetables. Well, historically, we have been limited by our language understanding to say like, okay, so the page that covers all these vegetables isn't scoring as high, isn't ranking as high, because it's not very focused on the thing that the user is asking us for. Whereas this other page is very specifically addressing the question that the user is asking us. Now with passage indexing, we can say like, oh, this page is about vegetables, and this part is about this specific kind of tomato. And then we can compare what we know about this specific part of the page that is covering the tomato to the other passage that happens to be a full page, actually, that is also talking about this tomato. And then we can say more granularly, we can say like, oh, actually, you know what? This passage might just be part of a larger page, but it has lots of really good pieces of information in here, including this fun fact about the Latin name of this tomato. Whereas the other one is basically just saying like, yeah, this is a kind of tomato, yay. And that allows us to more granularly rank these different things against each other. It does not mean that we are storing them differently. It does not mean that you need to do something specific about it. You just need to still make sure that your content is relevant and good to the queries that you want to be ranking for.
So let me break that logic a little bit with one question, because I remember our last webinar, Martin, when you were saying that with partial indexing, now we're talking for a second about indexing, that if there is a page about the dog, but there is also some cat content underneath, Google may ignore that content underneath it because it doesn't relate to the main content. So would that be something that may change with this new approach to ranking?
This might change now, yes, because we can now be more specific about the different topics and we can actually rank them more granularly. Beforehand, we couldn't. Beforehand, we had the ability to say like, okay, this page is mostly about dogs. And then we would also score it for cats. I was oversimplifying things a little bit because we were looking specifically at indexing in a very specific context in that webinar. But now looking at the broader world and everything considered, we might say like, oh, this page is 90% dog content, and then there's this 10% cat content. But if we then compare this to another page that has 100% cat content or 98% cat content, and it has more relevant bits and pieces to the query in question, then that would rank higher automatically because we are kind of downplaying the impact of the cat content on the page that is mostly dog content. Whereas now we can say like, yeah, I mean, the page is not, the page itself is not a good candidate, but actually it is a better candidate than we would have said beforehand, because we can now say like, oh yeah, there is only this 10% cat content or this 5% cat content, but this is pretty relevant to the query in question. So we could still show it in search results if we were to be able to pull out this piece of content specifically and make the user go there.
So was part of the goal of this, would you guess, or do you know, was part of the goal of this to disincentivize thin content, the creation of a billion different pages for tomatoes and cucumbers and... Right.
No, that's not the goal.
That's not it. Okay.
No, that's not the goal. Again, the goal of this entire endeavor is to help pages that have great information kind of accidentally buried in bad content structure to potentially get seen by users that are looking for this piece of information, especially in situations where it happens to be that we don't have super relevant information on other pages. They just happen to be more relevant to the topic than this page that has been diluted. Again, if you are in this webinar, you don't need to worry about this topic to begin with, because you probably build pages that are not having to be pulled into passages. Passages are kind of like a lifeline for pages that happen to have good information on them, just buried in or diluted in a really bad way.
6%.
Okay.
7% of the queries.
No, Tomek was making the dilution joke of 7%. Anyhow, Tomek's sense of humor. Cindy, you had one more question. Go for it.
Oh, there's so many questions that are good that are coming in through the chat. But
you're here.
Let's see. Could you have done passage indexing before the launch of mobile first indexing? Is rendering critical to it? Is it just about being in mobile first indexing and now we can do passages because we have rendering and we have better language understanding, and we could have never done it before mobile first indexing?
Wow, that's missing a lot of completely unrelated things. First things first, mobile first indexing has nothing to do with rendering or not. We had rendering beforehand, and we will continue to have rendering afterwards. It's just how we crawl and render things has slightly changed. We are now doing this primarily with a mobile crawler rather than a desktop crawler. That's mobile first indexing. In mobile first indexing has nothing to do with ranking and has nothing to do with rendering. Those like rendering, mobile first indexing, and passages are completely separate bits and pieces. They also live in completely separate parts of the infrastructure, right? Mobile first indexing is both the user agent with which we are fetching your pages, as well as the render viewport and settings that we are using. That's where mobile first indexing comes in. Then we have rendering, which pretty much all of the indexing goes through. So that's just like a side effect of being an index pipeline. And then we have passages, which is a way of scoring parts of a document rather than just the whole document. So beforehand, there was basically like one document had kind of like one score, and that was more or less it. And now we can say like, well, this document is scoring for the different bits and pieces, and this passage might be scoring a little better for cats than the rest of the document. So yes, we could have done this before mobile first indexing. That's not a problem. It just happens to be that it's after mobile first indexing.
Okay, so can you say no to passage indexing? Someone just wrote in the chat that they just want a blue link. So can you just opt out of being in that?
Well, if you just want a blue link, then I'm very happy to tell you that a passage is just a blue link. Good, then we are on the same page.
Okay.
But no, you can't. Why? How would you know? That's like saying I don't want to rank for these 5 paragraphs of my page.
I told you it's a fun question. I think it was it's an interesting approach to.
There's like a bunch of really cool questions in the chat. I'm really excited about seeing like what people have on their minds.
So
pick
Martin,
one and answer it.
Pick one.
Oh my! Am I allowed? So I want to answer an actual geeky question, which might not be super helpful to everyone in the audience, but I'll answer it anyway because I would assume that passages are internally handled as separate documents. You are assuming wrong. So a longer document exists in the index as a big document and has the passage documents. No. It's not more dynamic and fuzzy. It's simply just like one document that happens to be looked at and annotated with more bits and pieces of information than it used to be. And then in ranking, these can be scored independently. But we're talking about one document that can be scored like with multiple scores according to the query that it's being potentially made a candidate for.
I think I know where this confusion with indexing comes, because you use the verb annotation. So somehow you need to annotate that, and it can be confused with indexing.
Fair enough. That I understand. Also, we didn't make this better by calling it passage indexing. That was like the big mistake, I believe. That if I were out there reading that announcement, I would also go like, oh, so they're now actually indexing different bits and pieces, and they're just linking it to the main document. That's not how it works. Basically, how documents look internally is they are a gigantic collection of information, including the content, but that's just like the smallest part of the information. There's all sorts of scores and identifiers and bits and pieces attached to it. It's like one gigantic, you can imagine like a document in our database looks more like a folder with like lots of information in that folder that just happens to be associated with your piece of information. It's not literally just like one piece of HTML and then we kind of like attach a score to it. No, it's a little more complicated than that. For those of you who are geeky enough to get this, it's a huge protobuf with like lots of information in there. And part of that is what comes out of natural language understanding. You could call that BERT. And then we basically say like, so this part of the document is related to X, and we think it does this pretty well. And then it's also related to Y. where the correlation is a little lower than what it was before for the other thing. And basically, like, we get multiple scores across a single document. And then in ranking, when a question gets asked, we get all these candidate documents. So we basically get a heap of folders, and then we look into the folders like, okay, so at this basically page 5 in the folder, we look what's written there, and then we go like, oh, so this has this score, this has that score, and then that's how ranking comes together. Does that help? I don't know.
Amazing. So with the annotation comment, I think we can move to the question from, I think it was Jason Bernard, that Fabrice Canal at Bing says that Bing bot annotates content before putting it in the index. Two things. One, does Googlebot, or I'm guessing WRS, that's me, do this? Secondly, is this central to extracting passages for ranking?
Yes, Googlebot, Googlebot is an interesting question, but like the indexing pipeline does annotate documents with lots, as I said, like lots of things. One annotation is, this is what we think is the main part of the content. Another annotation is like, we think this is adult content. That's also an annotation. We think this page actually contains malware. That's another annotation. So all of these annotations are not necessarily even linked to something that directly shows in the search result pages. It's all sorts of things that we know about a page gets annotated in indexing. Is this central to passage indexing? Depends on how you look at it, I would say. I mean, these annotations have been there before. They just haven't been as granular before. So yes, the granularity of the annotations that we get now from the improved natural language understanding, yes, that definitely was a central piece of this feature being possible. But these annotations don't help anyone if they are not being looked at in ranking. So there was a change in the ranking part of the system that basically allowed us to use this additional granularity as well. And depending on which part you are focusing more on, if you say like the understanding of the content, the more granular understanding of the content of a page, that's the key change here, then I would say yes, that definitely lives in indexing. If you say like, no, actually, these annotations might have been there a couple of months ago already, or like a year ago or whatever, but now we're actually using these annotations in ranking, then no, that's not where the main essential part for passage indexing lives. Then you would look more into the ranking side of things. Semantic discussion.
So
really.
We have like 3-4 minutes before we're done. So I have one question that actually I find very interesting as well. So let's go. Maybe far-fetched, but will passage ranking, let's change that. Maybe far-fetched, but will passage ranking also influence how Google dynamic search ads are presented in the SERPs, since they're pulling content from the page for a certain query? Simply, can you have ads for passage? I'm guessing.
Simple, because this is about ads. I don't know. You would have to ask the ads team.
Okay, Martin, we have, I think, 2-3 questions tops, maybe 2 questions till the end. So if you want, do you want to pick 1 or 2 more?
Let's see. What else do we have here? I already started rebranding it to passage ranking. I like that. That's good. Could passage indexing imply that high authority websites might rank better for long tail keywords, even if they don't have a dedicated page for it, than more unknown websites? Again, we are mixing different things. We are mixing authority with content structure and stuff, and that's a ranking question where you would have to look into the weighting of the different ranking factors. I can't answer that. That's too specific into the ranking side of things. May internal anchors, which basically means these fragment links that are jump links on the same page, navigation help with better passage indexing and ranking? No, we're not looking at that, because if you already have some good useful structure that you can jump to, then I don't know if passages are necessarily helping you much here.
So I have an extremely rookie question. So I was actually thinking about that, because I know that Chrome is supporting basically that if you click on the link in Chrome, you're going to be directed to a specific part of the page. I'm wondering if you looked into if all the browsers will support that jump, that scroll.
It's a good question. I would have to check with the team. I haven't really talked to them about that, but I would assume that they have looked into these things beforehand.
I think in the jump to links that you can add on to any text, I think Firefox has already signed on in Opera. I'm not sure about Opera, but I think Firefox, yes.
And also Chromium being the basis for Opera and Edge means that these are on board as well. I think because it's in the WICG, it's a community draft, probably Apple sits on the table as well here. Oh, there's another really interesting question that I nearly missed, which I think is a good one. You indicated that people who know what they are doing in SEO don't need to worry about this. Yes. Does that mean that's similar to the change to mobile first, where people who don't know about this need to learn more and do something differently, or do we really just completely ignore it? I mean, with the mobile first indexing, there just were a bunch of things, or like lots of the web was built in an interesting way where you have a desktop version and then a less complete mobile version. So a few people were bitten by this. And by saying bitten by this, I mean like literally we would potentially not see the desktop version at some point in the future or less frequently, and thus potentially lose some of their content in the index. This change, I say you can ignore it because basically it either improves for you despite having a less well-structured bunch of content on your website, or it stays the same. So there's no potential pitfall of not looking into this. There's nothing that you need to learn. There's nothing that you need to do differently or better. We just help surfacing good information that happens to be buried in bad content structure. So does that mean that you can rely on this? No. If you do think about your content structure and do things well, continue to do that, please. If you don't, then you might have a chance of actually ranking where beforehand you weren't ranking.
So I have a question about that, because what I was thinking, like this is from an SEO agency standpoint. We have a lot of clients building multiple articles for extremely long tail topics, and very often would come in and say like no one is gonna search for that, or you may get like 2 clicks per year for this like very specific problem. But at the same time, if we would combine them into one larger article with passage ranking right now, that could lead to basically a win-win, because we have less content within the page, less pages, they're more valuable, and we can still get those clicks. What do you think about that crazy idea?
You can try that out. I don't know if that's going to pay off the way that you expected, because as many things, it's an automated system looking at things. If the automated system goes like, I'm not sure about this, then I wouldn't strategize on this too much. It's nice that we are doing this, but again, the intention was not so that people are starting to like rewrite or rejiggle their content that actually works right now. It is more a way of unlocking information that happens to be buried just because people don't know what they're doing. I wouldn't try to capitalize on it, really, if I were you. It might work out. I'm not saying this can't work. From a logical point of view, everything you said makes perfect sense. I'm just not sure if it necessarily plays out the way that we want in all cases.
We're just always looking for ways to reduce that page size. So I instantly thought about that idea. Do we want to go through? Like, I think we're more or less out of questions. So unless you have something, Cindy or Tomek, I think we can wrap this up. Cindy?
I would have some ranking questions, but
ranking questions. Oh yeah. So how does it correlate with link juice? Sorry, I had to.
That's my question.
That's a fair question. I know.
One day I will spill all my link juice with one of those. And then I'll have link juice all over me. What color is link juice anyway? I have never actually seen it in person. It's green.
Is it green?
Yeah.
Blue.
Should it be blue?
Links in Google.
Why do you all know it's green? Like, I feel like
Because there used to be a bar at the top that would tell you how your page was.
Okay, I'm missing it. Like, so can you confirm that link juice is green, Martin?
I thought it was blue, but maybe I'm just.
Evergreen.
It's evergreen. Yeah, that's a good point.
Angels is evergreen.
That's rendering juice. Oh no! I shouldn't have talked about rendering. Oh no, rendering juice. This is
it's gonna be a shitstorm on Twitter tomorrow.
I love this.
But, okay, I think this is a wrap. Thank you so much, Martin. Thanks so much for being so patient with us again.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the questions.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Tomek. And I think this is a wrap. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks, everyone.